not only in construction where the trades are agreeing to it voluntarily, but in all areas where the city purchases or issues franchises or issues loans or does other things to help private businesses. We want them all to have to hire from the city's low-income neighborhoods and NYCETC. So that is, it was a breakthrough actually yesterday. This is something that many community advocates have been calling for as long as I've been alive. I often tell people my dad joined with a minister in Philly named Leon Sullivan, and they sued the building trades over this issue in the early 60s. And Malcolm X worked on this issue in Brooklyn with Reverend Milton Galamison in the late 60s, mid 60s. And I organized with people who form Asian Americans for Equality around this issue when Confucius Plaza was being built in the late 70s, and Local 3 members brought guns. And we had a standoff right in Chinatown. And Jim Houghton formed Fight Back and a bunch of organizations called coalitions. And, you know, I don't say this publicly, but we used to go around and disrupt job sites and, you know, stop construction until contractors would hire local people. And NYCHA demanded this in the 90s. So this has been something that's been an issue for a long time. And finally, the city is saying, you know, we're going to do this. So the 26,000 jobs over the next 4 years actually is a floor. It's just the beginning and what this could mean. And basically the city is saying, we just don't contract out to get work done. We care who gets hired and who gets employed and who gets trained. I think this opens up a lot of incentives for businesses to support a more robust, more tightly coordinated, more heavily funded workforce development and training system, because they're going to have to put people to work. So I'll stop there and pass it to Amy, but I will tell you this is an exciting thing for me. It's something, you know, I've wanted all my life. And I'll say this too, Gary LaBarbera from the Building Trades has been great. I first talked to Gary about this 7 or 8 years ago. And, you know, frankly, I've been really blunt with the trades and they're blunt with me. And basically I was saying, your average member is 58 years old and white. If you don't bring in communities of color, building trades are gonna be a museum in 10 years. You guys can have a bright future, but it really means embracing these communities, because that is your future. It's your future. Not just my future, it's your future. And they fully get that. And they're genuinely on board. And, you know, they run a lot of job training centers too and are looking for partnerships with pre-apprenticeship programs. So I think we can do something here. So I'll stop there and pass to Amy.
Great. Hi everyone. This is always weird, right? Like there may be, you know, 10 of you or 150 of you, I'm not quite sure. It's good to see all of you that I know well or don't know. I'm Amy Peterson, Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. Used to be a member of the Employment Training Coalition. Used to work in non-traditional employment for women and have spent a lot of time thinking about workforce development from the city side and the nonprofit side, and am excited, so excited about yesterday. And I encourage any of you, if you didn't get a chance to, and probably didn't, right? Watch the mayor's press conference. Both Deputy Mayor Thompson and the mayor and Gary LaBarbera really spoke, I thought, just about what the impact could be for New Yorkers if we really took the money that we spend and put New Yorkers to work through that money. So I'd encourage you to do that. I think we have a slideshow. Chris, are you gonna show the slideshow? And I will give you guys a sense of what the community hiring is. And this is really, I'll say it's the beginning of a conversation, although I think we've probably been having this conversation for a while, but this is really the beginning of a conversation of how we all work together to implement this. Could not be more excited. about this, and just really, really thrilled to be talking about it. So hopefully everybody will do the hashtag community hiring NYC, and we can start to really get people thinking about this. So Chris, next slide. So I don't in any way need to tell this group the problem, right? It's interesting. I think that the awareness more widely of the problem that exists in New York City and nationwide with communities and groups of New Yorkers that just don't have access to good jobs, don't have access to the opportunities that others do, don't have the education, has really been elevated through this crisis and made much more apparent, and people are talking about it much more frankly than they did certainly before COVID. And I think that just escalates for all of us what we know, what we've really been so committed to pre-COVID, and now have what I think is a real opportunity to hopefully make real change for high poverty communities, for people of color, for New Yorkers, for bad jobs turning to good jobs, all the things that we need to do. Although I think we all know it's not going to be easy. Next slide. So this also is kind of clear and apparent to all of you. This is all the zip codes and poverty levels across New York City. And the high poverty rate is really apparent, especially now when you're looking at the different rates from above 15% all the way to above 35%. You can really see the disparity in New York City. And so one of the things that community hiring allows us to do is really look at going into communities, hence the name, and where the poverty rate is higher. Next slide. The slide before was kind of our look at this pre-COVID. And now when you think about the overlay of the impact of COVID, you can really see in these red communities how drastic COVID has been for these communities. So just in terms of what our need is and where we need to be right now in helping New Yorkers. Next slide. So we launched Hire NYC, right? For people who might be familiar with the work that we did early on in Sandy, we did the Sandy Recovery Hiring Plan. Section 3 exists. But generally, there is no ability, and I was literally on an email yesterday, when this was being announced, I was on an email chain where someone in the city had the idea, right? And I've seen this through the Racial Inclusion and Equity Task Force in multiple emails, and I know you guys have been asking this question for a long time, right? Jobs for whom? I want to make sure that I'm about to issue a contract for broadband, or I'm about to issue a technology contract or a construction contract. I want to make sure New Yorkers from Brownsville or the North Shore of Staten Island or the Bronx have access to those opportunities. And the answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is because of state law and the US Constitution, and that's the answer that you always get. And so what we're going to try to do is change state law so the answer will be yes, and we will all work together to figure out how to move forward. Next slide. Other states don't necessarily have the same state law, and a lot of other cities, especially when looking at construction, have really thought about how to focus jobs on residents. And so you look across programs in San Francisco and Seattle and Los Angeles, and you can see, in Boston, and you can see where people have, leaders in cities have said, in partnership with unions and in partnership with workforce groups like yours, have said, we want to hire, set goals, and been able to make it work. And so that's why, we know this can work, and we're excited to make it work here. Next. So I think I talked a little bit about this, but I will say that we do know it works, right? When I went back into government to work on Build It Back, there was a huge cry from all of your organizations, right? The unions, the apprentice directors, the elected officials, Align, Faith in New York, a whole large number of groups said, you know, Sandy devastated New York communities. If we're gonna get money and rebuild homes and rebuild boardwalks and rebuild these communities, we should make sure that we're hiring people from those communities. And so in that instance, we had both federal money, and federal money actually allows you, and especially with Section 3, to put hiring goals, and Executive Order 11246, which I like to plug at all times, which actually has requirements for men and minorities. But additionally, we were able to kind of get away with, for lack of a better term, using encourage language, and said, you know, here's some Sandy zip codes. We looked at a bunch of criteria to determine what were the highest impacted Sandy zip codes. And we said, we're going to set a requirement on these contracts that 20% of the workers come from those zip codes. And it worked. But the only reason it really worked was because we engaged with the workforce community to actually recruit people from the community, get them into training programs, and then get them work on the contract. So a big part of what we're going to be talking about for a while is how community hiring really works. The state legislation is a huge first piece of it, and we need your help on that. But there's also the other pieces, right? Community hiring means going into communities and recruiting, establishing ways that people can access training, and having the training directly related to the jobs. And so that's how we made it work on the Sandy work, and that's how we're gonna make it work moving forward on community hiring. So I wanna talk a little bit, I think, about the bill. Next slide. And that's a carpenter. I saw carpenters on. That's a carpenter, and this is a laborer who went through the construction skills and non-traditional employment for women programs and actually worked on Sandy homes. So it's nice to see them. So the community hiring state legislation is a big step forward in helping us, is the only step forward we can take to allow us to do this. And I'm going to skip to the next slide because it actually has the better details. So next slide. So community hiring, the legislation will allow the city of New York for the first time to be able to put requirements for hiring on all of the ways we spend money. As the deputy mayor mentioned, general municipal law says we can't do that right now. We can only use price, value, and integrity, corruption issues to say who we give our contracts to. We need to be able to say we want to hire New Yorkers. If we're spending money, which we do, even in these tough times, we're still spending money, that the money we spend should ensure that there's good jobs for people from our low-income communities. So the bill itself is going to be broken into two categories. So for construction and building service labor, just like the PLA that we announced yesterday, because one, when you get a prevailing wage job doing construction or building service labor, you kind of come out of the low income category pretty quickly. And also because of the way people kind of get referred to work. For construction and building service labor, the hiring goals will be based on community. So based on economically disadvantaged as geographic areas. And we spent a fair amount of time in thinking through both the PLA and this. And the simplest, right, is zip code, as much as it's imperfect in what real neighborhoods are in New York City. The simplest way to do this is zip code, because everyone knows what their zip code is. And while looking at a lot of different criteria is important, I think, you know, just poverty, the simplest way to attack this is the poverty level. And so that's where we landed with the PLA, and it'll be interesting to see where we land when we go through the rule process, but I think it was a good mix. For all the other ways we spend money, so not construction or building services jobs, it will be tied to the individual or family's income. And so that's, you know, kind of two ways that will bring people into the community hiring and give them opportunities. The other thing that's part of the legislation is the ability to set minimum ratios for apprentices. We currently don't have the ability to do that in the city. We have an apprentice directive, so you need to be tied to an apprentice program, but we don't actually require apprentices work on the jobs. And apprentice is the way to get more entry-level workers into the trades, as one example. But apprenticeship isn't, and shouldn't be, if we can figure out how to make this work better, only limited to the building trades, right? And I know 1199 and healthcare and technology are trying to come up with some also apprenticeship programs. And I think that is a really good way to ensure that people are able to kind of enter a job, work, and get training at the same time and have advancement, which is something I know we all care deeply about. So that's in the law, the draft law, and I think will be a really big, exciting thing for us to get in place. Next slide. So how does it work? So I'm gonna first. The idea is we set this legislation, it gives the city the ability to do this for the first time, and then we do it through rules. There's a lot of stuff we procure, and we can talk about that a little bit. So different things will have different rules, right? We've laid some groundwork in the construction with what we've set for the PLA. But rulemaking is a process that takes a little bit of time. So if we really want to respond now to COVID, and we do, right? And we want to make sure that we use this point in time to really bring awareness to how the city spends money and who gets the jobs behind how people spend money. We need an emergency rulemaking authority. So that's in the bill. We need the bill to become a law so we can do emergency rulemaking. It's incredibly important. Another big piece of this is that it's one thing to have liquidated damages if someone doesn't meet a goal, right? But we all know how maybe ineffective that is. It's important, but it's not that great to say after the fact that someone didn't do what they were supposed to do, right? So part of what we're trying to have in the bill is the ability to have this be something that people are dealing with and thinking about upfront, and is actually part of the award methodology for contracts. So we can actually look at both what their plans are and their past experience in thinking about how we're awarding contracts moving forward. And I'd love to hear from you, because I have in the back of my head somebody who's doing that really well somewhere else, that just by putting it in the award criteria, it really drives the work even before they get the contracts, right? It can be effective. The other thing that is in the bill is construction. Everyone talks about construction when they think about this, but we spend money on a lot of things, and I encourage you all to go look at Checkbook on the controller's website and see all the money we spend as a city of New York and all the contracts we put in place and all the services we have. We talked to somebody yesterday, and somebody brought up furniture movers and food service and healthcare. There's just so many ways the city spends money, both through procurement contracts, but also in other ways, right? Tax benefits, franchises, concessions, grants. So the bill is expansive enough to allow us to establish community hiring across those different ways that the city funds, gives out its funding. So next slide. And so this is where you guys all come in, right? Community hiring, the ability to get past the you can't do it, and the ability to target the jobs that the city of New York is creating and its money, and the money it spends, is so important, right? Because you need the jobs to be able to train someone and put them into the jobs. So that's incredibly important, but it's only going to be successful if we figure out how to make it work. And so I really want, having been doing this for a while, the ability to be make it simpler for a New Yorker to understand how to access a job, training program, how to partner with all of your great organizations. And so using community hiring to be in the neighborhoods, to really be connecting to organizations like all of yours, and to really be kind of recruiting New Yorkers into letting them know about all these opportunities. And then we built into the legislation the concept of referral sources, right? So we are still limited because of the US Constitution that we can't say it can't be New Jersey or Wisconsin, it has to be New York City or even New York City or New York State. And we also didn't want to necessarily, or I think, and I'm not the legal expert, have the ability to say we particularly want to focus on different groups of people. But through the referral source mechanism, we'll be able to really focus in different ways how we're targeting getting New Yorkers to jobs. So through partnerships with all of your organizations who do training, who work on the ground with communities, through, and the example I always use, although now I'm going to expand it to all the boot camps, is if we have technology jobs, right? How the referral sources can and should be CUNY technology grads and all the boot camps, right? There's tons of people who are doing really good community technology training. And so how do we connect those groups as a requirement of the city and doing work with the city to get people into that? And so, you know, I think there's been a lot of really good work through MOCJ and in partnership with all of the groups that work with people out of the criminal justice system. We've been talking about with the borough-based jails team how to connect to that, and this will just make that so much easier. And so the referral source is a big piece of that. And so, you know, I think that what we're all going to be thinking about, and I hope working together, and I know actually not hope, working together on is how this all works, like community, some sort of connection, group of training programs, group of city agencies, partners who think about things like technology or construction or healthcare or whatever the job is, and then partnering it with the contracts that we're putting in place. So the next slide. And I just want to, I think what I would love all of you to do, and you may know all this off the back of your head, have thought of this a lot, you know, start thinking about how we spend our money, right? And where the jobs are and where we should be thinking, especially in the immediate term, of where our focus should be. You know, again, and we talk about construction a lot, and I have some background in construction. We just did the PLA, so that's a good model for in the Sandy work that I talked about, you know, on the ground in the community, recruiting people, a really strong set of programs that has training, and then a relationship with the employer so you can have that whole piece. But how can we build that across all of the other spending that the city does? So, you know, the city's already announced that it's going to do work on broadband, so that's a real opportunity. We're certainly spending money right now across the city on cleaning, right? Think a lot about some of the things we're spending money on related to COVID, but also just the things that we invest the city's large budget in, and where there might be jobs. So I look forward to really thinking about this. We're going to, in partnership with Racial Inclusion and Equity Task Force, really go to each agency and talk about what contracts they have coming up. But it's also going to be really good to pair with the workforce programs that are out there who may have been trying to kind of make these connections and do this work for a while, to see where we can really elevate this work very quickly. I think Chris just popped his head up, so I think I'm turning it over him to close this part out before we do the question and answers. But before I do that, I'll just say, yesterday was a pretty monumental day in the fact that we have a way, and there's been some amazing work, and Deputy Mayor Thompson kind of came in and said, why can't we do this? And the law department really thought about how to make this happen. And then we spent a lot of time figuring out how to make it work within the system. So we have a really exciting legislation that will get us past that answer, that if you ask the question today of anyone, could I possibly use the city's money to create jobs for people in some community? The answer will be no. So until we have the legislation, until we get past this barrier, the answer will continue to be no. So it's so important that we try to really make this happen, especially in this moment in time that we're in. So Chris?
Great, thanks Amy. And I'm Chris Neal from the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. So as Amy said, community hiring, it doesn't exist today. We can't do it. And we need your help to pass the law in Albany that will make it so. And there are two things that we're going to ask you to do today. One is to post on social media, post about community hiring legislation. And I see that there are a number of groups on the call today who did post yesterday, who knew about the announcement that was happening, and we really appreciate your support there. We've got a lot of traction on social media. We have developed a whole toolkit with a bunch of sample tweets and some images that you can share. So I believe Joey will share that with you after the call today, and we really strongly encourage you to tweet, to do whatever on social media and share it with partners and encourage them to do the same. We've got to get the attention of state legislators. We've got to get them to take up this bill and pass it. Secondly, we want to convene a virtual rally day. So obviously we can't really go up to Albany and have a rally there, given COVID-19. But what we want to do is have a virtual rally. We want to convene state legislators and their staff and show in force that there is support for this bill and that New Yorkers want it to pass so that we can create job opportunities for low-income New Yorkers. And so we will have a survey where that Joey will send around that you can express your support and your willingness to participate in this day. We haven't set the date yet, but you can indicate whether your organization is willing to take part and to share that information with other partners. So those are the two things. There will be other things that we will probably ask you to do, but for right now, post on social media and register your interest in participating in a virtual rally. So Joey, I think we're ready to go to the questions for Phil and Amy.
So thank you, Deputy Mayor Amy and Chris. I'm gonna now hand it over to our first question from Kathleen Culhane, who is the president of Non-Traditional Employment for Women, and she's also the board chair of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Kathleen.
Hi, thank you, Joey. And thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Chris. As you all can imagine, as I work at Non-Traditional Employment for Women, very excited about the announcement yesterday, really excited about moving all of this forward, and happy that, you know, Chris gave us the answer to one of my questions in terms of how can we help, and we have very specific ways to help there, so that's great to see. And so my other question is, you know, and Amy, you mentioned it, how do we simplify for folks, you know, how to access a job in New York City? And so this goes a long way to do that. And so I wonder how we help you, we get the state legislation passed, we move this forward. As I've been talking about with a lot of folks on this call, we talk about the structural pieces. So how do we then best work together with you and others in the city in terms of the structural pieces of, you know, for new, it's often about getting someone from a partner organization that is also a coalition member into news program and then into these, for us, trades careers. And so what are some of those pieces that we can start working on now to hit the ground running?
Okay, I'll answer that. Phil, you should jump in at anything you want to answer.
Thanks.
So what's interesting, right? And Joey and I talked about this. You guys collectively did the workforce economic recovery report, right? Exactly. And I think did some real thinking about some of the public works opportunities across construction, but other things. So I think one, it's working together and you know, every day since March, I continue to kind of see coming out of all of your groups and a lot of other places, like a little bit of the same need and message and we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We all in different ways, but all very similar, right? Even the announcement this week, the amazing announcement with the CEOs and the transformation of here to here, is very similar to our announcement, right? It's all about both creating jobs and creating a pathway to those jobs. So I think I would really like to figure out across the partners within the Employment Training Coalition and outside, right? I think there's probably some other people who work in partnership. You know, what are the industries that we should be thinking about so that we've got the kind of collective group of trainers together to think about what jobs should we be targeting within this. So that's like one piece. And then what's the best way to reach people on the ground in the communities? And how do we start this and where do we start? And we had been doing a lot of work pre-COVID, right? And probably in partnership with a lot of you, we'd identified a number of communities. We'd started to recruit for the pre-apprenticeship programs. We've been partnering with Henry Street Settlement and a lot of other groups in different communities. And that was all kind of on the ground in person. And so now we're not in that place. So I think it's, you know, kind of thinking about which communities we want to target and how best to do that on the ground in those communities in partnership with the organizations that do that. Thinking about how the industries work together so that we can target some initial contracts and just building it all together. So and I think it's a lot of work that we all really need to figure out how best to collectively engage in so that we can go to the Bronx, a neighborhood in the Bronx, Tremont, and say, we're here to talk about community hiring and have a number of partners there and a number of job opportunities that we're targeting people for that are linked to real city jobs.
Great. And I agree that, you know, some of the focus in terms of the industries, broadband, and other ideas that were in your PowerPoint today were in our recommendations as well for recovery. So there's a lot of alignment there. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I think, and what I'm going to say is going to sound a little abstract at first, but I think this changes the incentive structures when it comes to workforce development. So I worked in New Orleans after Katrina with the pension funds of the building trades, Housing Investment Trust, Building Investment Trust. And they made a $1.2 billion commitment to rebuild Lafitte Houses, which was a 1,900 unit public housing development that had been flooded out, was vacant, and to do other stuff in the Treme community in New Orleans. And they wanted to actually have a breakthrough in terms of organized labor having a presence in Louisiana. And they found out that there wasn't a job training infrastructure, a pre-apprenticeship training infrastructure in New Orleans like there is in New York and other cities. And so that forced them, they opened 6 job training centers in New Orleans. In preparation for all this work they were going to do, they were financing and the housing. And what they discovered when they opened the job training centers was that the average adult walking in had a 4th grade reading and writing and a math level functionally. And so all of a sudden they found themselves in a different kind of business than they were engaged in before in terms of like basic education and training. And then the laborers union had a provision which said they wouldn't bring ex-felons into their apprenticeship programs or even pre-apprenticeship programs. But what they found out was that in New Orleans, in Louisiana, prisoners get early release if they finish their GED while in prison. So a lot of prisoners finish their GED. So the people who actually most work ready in New Orleans were the people coming out of the prisons. So the laborers changed their rules and said, no, we're going after people coming out of prisons because they were more work ready than any other group. And the point of my saying all this is to say, once you change the incentive structures, people start collaborating in whole new ways. Now the building trades in New York say they want to be they want to invest and bring their pension funds into rebuilding NYCETC. I guarantee you, it changes the whole attitude and orientation towards people who live in public housing, because now their retirement savings are invested in public housing. So they want to make double sure people in public housing are going to do well or on the job or advancing, blah, 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 because it's changed the incentive structure. So this just opens up all kinds of possibilities for partnerships that we haven't even imagined yet. So that's what I want to say.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm now going to hand it over to Gaspar from the Lower East Side Employment Network to ask his question.
Hi there. Thank you so much for hosting this event, NYCETC. You guys are doing great work. My question is about how to enforce the community hiring goals. Something that we face in the Lower East Side with some of the local hiring commitments is that many of the residents may either be transitionally or informally living in the neighborhood, be it with parents or other extended family or in shelters. They don't necessarily have leases, especially individuals in NYCHA due to the succession challenges. And they may not have utility bills. So it's very hard to prove or indicate their residency other than putting the address on a resume. So I'm wondering if the Workforce Development Office, Amy Peterson, and Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson can maybe answer that concern and that challenge when it comes to enforcement. Compliance, that is, sorry.
Yeah, so I'll start because it's interesting, right? First, I thought your question was about making sure that the contractors did what they're supposed to do. But then I think your question was also about how do you make sure there's opportunities for people if they don't completely fit the thing, right? And Section 3 being a HUD requirement and being part of NYCHA, I know that they're, at least I think they are, really tied to like being on the lease and things like that. So for us, you know, we're going to put in place rules and we're going to figure out how to implement them. But one of the things we want to make sure is that this is reaching the people we want it to reach and doing the purpose that we want it to do. And so I think kind of as we're talking about the rules and as we're talking about networks like yours and how you've had success in these and challenges, we need to think that through. You know, one of the things that we're not doing here, right? Although it'll probably happen in some instances, is this is not hyper local, to use the test and trace term, hyper local, meaning you live in Brownsville, you're necessarily going to work on that Brownsville project. And people who've worked with the construction trades know that like that doesn't work, right? You get into a union, you get sent anywhere. And so it is hyper local in that we want to be in the community recruiting, and we want to be recruiting the people who need the jobs the most and connecting them to the jobs. But then it doesn't matter if you move from one low income zip code to another, and the ones that are kind of, you have to show that you're low income, we're gonna have to figure out how you demonstrate that, and we're gonna connect people to jobs. But the benefit of working with all of you, and I think that that's what's so important, is you know, people who come to your door and who are working with you are the people we want to connect to the jobs. And so how we measure that, how we you know, identify the right people and connect them is something we need to work together. Our goal on the other side, and we've been talking to a number of people, and are definitely going to have transparency about reporting about who gets jobs, what wages they're getting, where they come from, and demographics. And I'll say, as I've been saying to a number of people, right, there's this like catch-22 in that we want to track, we want to have compliance, we want to make sure we're having an impact, but we also want to protect people's identities, whether they're people who've been involved in the criminal justice system or immigrants, or now with COVID, you know, there's all these like kind of conflicting things that we're going to need to figure out how to deal with. So that's not all the answers, but you know, I think you identified a challenge that we need to work on, and I see Phil.
Well, I just want to add that I think, you know, under this legislation, the city would have some rulemaking authority and flexibility. So my vote would be to use the NYC ID card for people to establish their, you know, address, not a lease necessarily. But we'll have some ability to be flexible in these things and to set the rules.
Thank you. Our next question is from Evelyn Ortiz from NYCETC.
Hi, everyone. So this is Evelyn Ortiz. I'm the Deputy Director for New York State's Workforce Association, NYCETC. And this is really exciting. And I am, my question is really around what feedback you've received so far from the state legislature and the governor's office. Have you actually identified any champions this far? And I'm sorry, it's like a three-pronged question, but is the city also thinking about partnering with other regions such as Long Island or like the city of Rochester, Buffalo, to help, make this a bigger effort and get more support from the state?
I'll start, and we don't have our legislative team on the call today, but we have been meeting with legislators. Last week, I met with the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus, state caucus. We've been meeting individually with legislators as well. And I'm told that there's competition amongst the legislators over who's going to carry this bill. So far, there's been, virtually with everyone we've spoken to, there's been excitement and support. And so right now we're leaving it to the leadership of both houses at the state to decide who can carry the bill. But we haven't encountered very much resistance at all. In terms of the governor, I don't know. He tends to really like the building trade. So, and Gary LaBarbera and those folks. So if there's broad support in the legislature and the building trades are for it, and 1199 and 32BJ are enthusiastically for it right now and will be, I think the governor will want to be with this. I have a hard time seeing in the middle of our COVID crisis with millions unemployed that he's going to say, oh no, I don't think people who live in these neighborhoods should have like priority or access on these jobs. I don't foresee that. Anything's possible. But I think if you help us get the legislators lined up, I think we have a very good shot.
It'll be my pleasure.
As far as upstate, I've only been to Rochester once. I'd get lost if I went up there, but if you tell us, who to talk to, we'd be happy to go up there.
No, that's great. I know that there's interest on Long Island particularly, so it's great to hear that there's opportunity for this to expand in other regions across the state.
Thank you, Evelyn. Our next question is from Ruben Colon. Chris Neal actually has indicated that he'll answer this question, I believe. Ruben, you can speak now.
Yeah, sure. I see that, can I be heard? Am I being heard?
We can hear you.
Yes. I see that a lot of the focus is on apprenticeship programs. I live in Brooklyn. I'm aware that there are a lot of, in my case, carpenters that live and work in Brooklyn, often in the non-union sector. They're not gainfully employed, or they're not really making a living wage, if you will. Is there going to be an opportunity or a component within this potential PLA and legislation that would address the need for recruitment of journey level residents in the communities?
I'll let Amy or Phil answer that, actually.
Yeah, hi. So there's kind of, I think, two questions there, right? So the entire point of this is to put the people you just talked to work, right? If there are people from communities in Brooklyn that have carpentry skills and maybe were in the union and left, or have never been in the union, we should figure out how to get them to work and do that in partnership with the Carpenters Union, which is a really committed to being on the ground in the communities, and I've seen some people posting to that. This will apply to both union, not the PLA, but the community hiring legislation, both union and non-union. I think the question of like, can you get into the union as journey level versus apprentice is not a question. Well, I understand it, not a question I can answer, but yes, if there are people who especially have skills already, we want to figure out how to put them to work on city projects, and would love to kind of sit down and talk to all of you about kind of things that you think are good groups of people that we should be focused on right away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Our next question is from Libby DeLucia. Libby, you can speak now.
Okay, you can hear me?
We can.
Great. Thanks, Joey. My name's Libby DeLucia. I work with BWI and the Brooklyn Network's data cabling program, and this is really interesting to me because the broadband initiative obviously came out at a city level, and we were all ready to go pump all our grads into this opportunity, and it wasn't obvious how to do that. So it's awesome to hear about this legislation, and my question is just, what do you foresee the biggest objections to be to this legislation, and how would you address those?
I'll start, and then Amy, maybe. I think one objection will be where we can't find the workers, and where do we go to find the workers? And I've heard that already from a few people, but I'll turn it to Amy to answer this.
So I think that is one of the things that we know the answer to, right? We can prepare and train and make people ready, and it's always been funny to watch, and it happened on the Sandy work, right? Like the idea that if you went through Workforce One, you wouldn't be trained and qualified to work on these projects, and clearly are, as it is with all of yours. So I think that's a challenge. I think when we were going to do this pre-COVID, we were going to hit a lot of, and we may still, right? And also like in front and behind the scenes, and this is why we need you guys to be very loud about this. It's another thing that contractors have to deal with, or businesses that do business with the city, and how it actually works on projects where they already have a workforce, right? And who are we giving opportunities to? So I think that kind of barrier is going to be there. People are going to be like, I'm a business and I already have my workers, or I can't add another requirement to the work that I do. But all of us know that both of those things we can do, right? Every company that has workers hires people every day, and they can be intentional about who they hire and where they hire from. I will say that I think there'll be less, at least loud vocal, and so maybe behind the scenes, right? Objections that way right now, because it's very hard post or during COVID, right? To say that we should be making opportunities available for these workers, and everyone wants to kind of continue to do work and show that they can do that. So I think we're in a worse place, obviously, but a better place in that regard. But I do think that's going to be, that is going to be a question, and that's why the voices you all have about, there are New Yorkers, there's great programs that train them, and prepare them, and we can make them ready. And I think the debate about that you're all involved in and a big part of is what are the job qualifications sometimes, and the real job qualifications is going to be something that we should all be loud about, that who can get prepared and be ready for this work.
Thank you, Libby. We have a question in the chat from the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. I'm going to allow them to talk right now. You can speak now.
Oh, hi, it's Martha Jackson from the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. I'm just really interested, given the current state of our city and the number of businesses that have closed, as well as the number of empty buildings that there are, what does the construction trade imagine these jobs will be, and what will it look like going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that in terms of the overall construction industry. But I do think that there was a lot of investment pre-COVID, and a lot of things we knew we needed to invest our money in across the city. And now there's more, right? I think the huge advancement, as Libby mentioned, in the broadband recently, the idea of some of the green work, especially where it's tied to kind of air conditioning and ventilation systems and heat pumps and things like that, hopefully will be advanced more. So, you know, I think I think that it's going to take time, as everything is right now, but I mean, the work is moving, and it's slowly, I think, ramping back up, and the construction industry has worked really closely with the real estate and advisory council of the city of New York to make sure that construction is happening safely.
I would just say there's going to be a lot of construction work in New York. NYCHA has outlived the buildings are old, they've outlived their life, and they have to be rebuilt or else they're just going to fall apart. And so there's going to be a lot of work there. We have 900,000 buildings that need to be retrofitted for energy efficiency to reduce our carbon load. We have 520 miles of coastline, and the sea levels really are rising. We got to deal with it. We can't be like Trump and say it's not going to happen. It's going to go away. So agencies are actually planning for these things. If one of the candidates for president has said if they're elected, they're going to do a massive investment in green infrastructure, and because this nation needs it. And so there's going to be no shortage of construction work moving forward.
Thank you, Martha. And we'll take one final question. This is from Jessica Conway. Jessica, you can speak now.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if there is any additional funding for the field, both for the training programs that would make the direct placements, but to Kathleen's point earlier, the other programs that are making referrals to the training programs and doing that on the ground recruitment to support any additional work or capacity they would be doing as part of this hiring initiative.
Well, I'll start with this. Right now, the city has a $10 billion deficit, and we are announced the possibility of 22,000 people laid off beginning in October. And the federal government has not come through to pay for COVID-related costs that we're incurring. And the state so far has not given us authority to borrow money. So we're not talking about new money right now. We are in a desperate financial situation right now. Things could be really different in a few months. And you know, there could be, we could have another conversation as the fiscal situation improves about what might be possible from the city. What I will say is, as this program emerges, I think the incentive structures for businesses and companies to invest in workforce changes. And we all need to be thinking about what that could look like. The building trades include the costs of training for their centers when they negotiate, you know, agreements on construction projects. You know, now I think all of us need to think about more broadly, how should workforce groups that do training and pre-apprenticeship training, other types of training, lock in businesses as well, and not just the city, when it comes to funding the training for the workers that they need.
Thank you. So that concludes the briefing. The presentation shared today during the briefing will be shared again to all of you who registered early next week. A quick program note, please join us next week on August 20th for the second of our Meet the 2021 Candidates for New York City Mayor. We'll be speaking with Diane Morales, former executive director of the Door and the Phipps Neighborhood Center. This conversation will be followed by Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams on September 10th, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer on October 15th, retired Brigadier General Lori Sutton on November 5th, and others to be announced in the coming weeks. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. And of course, I want to once again thank Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, Amy Peterson, and Chris Neal. Enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend.
Thank you.